Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. Today, we're going to talk about the future of work and workforce demographic shifts that are happening. To do so, I'm really happy to be joined by Josh Wright, who's the Executive Vice President of Growth for Lightcast. Josh, welcome to Trending in Education.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I'm glad to be here.
You've been doing some work. You and the team over there created this really fascinating report. It's called The Rising Storm, Building a Future-Ready Workforce to Withstand the Looming Labor Shortage. We'll include a link to that in the show notes. So if folks do want to follow along, there's a lot in there. But before we do that, we always like to start by getting to know you a little bit better. Can you share with us your background, your professional origin story?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here. I've been at Lightcast, formerly MZ Burning Glass, for 16 years. I formerly led our workforce development, economic development division. And now I'm, as you mentioned, head of growth specifically for our education and government team. So
Okay.
we serve about 1,000 colleges and about 700 different communities, community organizations, economic workforce development organizations, supplying labor market analytics to those organizations. And I've been in different roles over that time, previously at MZ, then MZ Burning Glass, and then we've rebranded to Lightcast.
Mhm.
Before starting at Lightcast, I was a journalist, a sports writer for various newspapers. I still do some freelance writing. So I mixed journalism, communications, marketing, and really through my career journey was part loving writing and journalism, and then realizing got a young family to support, trying to figure out how do I grow in my career, and the skills that I was learning and doing journalism and newspaper work day to day. I didn't realize how they transcended into the corporate world, and they've been really helpful over time. And I've been able to get into different management leadership positions, and
Mhm.
and here I am about 20 years, actually close to 25 years after graduating college,
Yeah.
in a career that I would have never imagined at that time. So.
That's good to know that the durable skills are there, that there is some transferability of what you learn as a sports writer and a journalist and how that can translate into where you are now. And just maybe one more note on what Lightcast is and what you're focused on there.
Lightcast is a labor market analytics company. So we are a data company through and through, laser focused on providing insights on the job market, and specifically local job markets, because that's really where, like politics, all labor markets, all jobs are local at some level. There is
Mhm.
more and more globalization, more and more remote work happening. At the same time, companies, industry activity, economic activity really differs from labor market to labor market. And there are
Mhm.
hundreds and hundreds of labor markets. If you think of all the different counties, but really metropolitan areas, functional economic areas that make up the US economy, let alone, we also serve many organizations in Canada and Europe and across the globe as well.
Mhm.
So we are very laser focused on providing the best insight locally to colleges, community colleges, universities, federal government agencies, and increasingly companies who are looking at this, looking at talent intelligence to help drive their hiring practices, where they put their, the sites and locations of their companies,
Mhm.
to how they build out strategic workforce planning. We sit at the nexus really of educators, communities, and those enterprises or employers. And we have a pretty interesting view because we work with all of those at a both hyper local level and at a national level, and being able to see how this whole ecosystem works.
I would encourage folks to check this stuff out. There's other reports on your site that look more at, you know, geographic, regional labor trends within the US. There's like a yearly report where you see where the jobs are going and where the economic climate is changing at a regional level, which is important. Thinking globally, acting locally is still relevant when you're thinking about the future of work. And then this report is pretty profound. Like you're actually covering macro trends that really started in the 20th century. And now, history is a vector. We're now looking ahead into the rest of the 21st century, both short and long term. Can you frame up for us what drove the development of this particular report?
So Lightcast has been around for over 20 years. And as we've been looking at these trends, we started about 3 or 4 years ago, really, really noticing some concerning demographic trends that we were hearing on the edges from some of our clients and from some folks in our industry, but we didn't feel like they were being talked about enough.
Mm,
So in 2021, we released our first, what we called our demographic drought report,
mm,
to look at just some of these broader macro trends on declining labor force participation, aging of the population, the silver tsunami, this notion of this massive baby boomer retirements. So in 2021, obviously coming out of the pandemic, there was a lot of different things to grapple with, try to understand. And as we've now since released a few versions of this report, this latest one that does, I think, the best job that we've done of just kind of synthesizing these massive trends, how organizations and communities and educational institutions can adapt to these trends and the potential solutions around them. You could think about this as a lot of doom and gloom. We really seek to be as solutions oriented as we go through this as well, because it's one thing to know about what's happening or what's coming. It's another thing, what can we do about it?
yeah. I'm a big fan of bad portmanteaus, and I frequently call this a problatunity. It's a problatunity, Josh. The other thing I've heard, we'll talk a bit about AI in the conversation here as well, because it is a factor, is that one of the things we're going to have to get better at is problem formulation as the tools that can solve problems get better. What are the actual problems? How do we point our attention in the right direction so that we're focused on the right types of solutions? And that was where this really was an eye opening report for me because I have a lot of conversations with educational thought leaders, and many of them are in higher ed. And there's a lot of talk about the demographic cliff, but there's always that second level insight that sure, there's a demographic cliff, but we all are going to live a lot longer. There's a much bigger context to kind of understand the fact that there'll be fewer, traditionally college age students in the next few years entering higher ed. But when you look at this more broadly at the entirety of the demographics, the drought is getting pretty extreme, and starting to forecast what that might mean has implications certainly for higher education, community colleges, local education, workforce education. Those are all themes that are really woven throughout the report. What's the best way to kind of begin to attack this? Because it's a pretty big problem that you're surfacing here.
Yeah, so maybe I can just try to do my best job of summarizing what we talk about in the report, and
Yeah.
then we can start talking through some of the implications. So I think the best way to summarize the report is what people see as, whether you call it the enrollment cliff, the demographic cliff, some of the potential workforce shortages. This report puts a very fine point on that this is a bigger issue than the vast majority of people are thinking.
Yeah.
And it's a bigger issue because of some of these macro trends that really can't be reversed or will not be reversed anytime. It would take decades to reverse because of what's happening.
Mm,
So, two or three of the biggest trends that we talk about here are, we have seen an explosion of retirements in the last couple of years of baby boomers.
mhm,
We knew that this was coming. We knew that this was a massive generational segment that was very formidable, in the last several decades in the labor force.
mhm,
And we knew that, again, the silver tsunami was coming, but it's coming at a more rapid clip. And it's actually, the number of retirements has been outpacing expectations.
mhm.
So that's one of the segments.
And just real quick on that segment, frequently senior leadership, a wealthy generation, a big generation. And in a lot of ways, the report highlights how our metaphors, our mental models have been very much dictated by the baby boom, even though we're now, 50 plus years past when folks were first talking about the baby boom.
Yeah, absolutely. What we try to do is both touch on these very specific data points and provide very rigorous data analysis, but also talk through some of the societal
Mhm,
and some of the mindset shifts that are going to be needed through this as well. So if you think about the mindset of like, well, there are these, again, boomers in the labor market, either they're woke longer. There's people who say, oh, I don't want, immigrants to take my jobs. I'm going to retire soon because of other factors, or I've got all this money. Or, there's another big thing, as you mentioned, a very wealthy generation that is passing on their wealth to younger generations, which actually has a broad implication because there's fewer people to work. And then there's some of that segment of folks who either don't need to work or are less inclined to work as well. So
right.
there are a lot of things that are tied into this, both from a worker mindset, but also from an employer mindset and from a community mindset and education. So it's like, there's a lot of things that are tied into that,
Yeah.
just
And
for the boomers themselves.
yeah. And then even beyond the boomers, the thing that this surfaced, I was recently talking to Jane Oates at Working
Mm,
Nation.
yes.
And what she was very much focused on was workforce participation. and how aging workforce. She also talked about justice involved and, formerly incarcerated folks is something that shows up in this report, as well as folks who've had addiction issues in their lives.
Mhm. Mhm.
Jane also talked about the disabled, but like there are a lot of folks who are questioning how much they should engage, how much they should participate in the workforce. And then your point about millennials, as a proud Gen Xer, the Jan Brady effect, like the wealth is moving to millennials who then have the freedom. And I think a lot of us have been questioning how much we want to be grinding post pandemic. I think there was like a broader awakening
Yeah.
around that. That is now causing some questioning reflected in some of your data around how much folks are actively participating in the workforce versus potentially opting out or blending a little bit differently their work life balance.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see the data very clearly if you look at labor force participation rate over time.
Mhm.
And it took a serious hit in 2020 where we knew, that both, the data is super stark at whether you're looking at unemployment rate, job counts, all of those things. So much happened during 2020, of course.
Great resignation, the great reshuffle. There was a lot of great things. They weren't all great for our workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there were companies closing, big shocks to the economy. A
Mhm.
lot of those things, thankfully, were short lived, quick bounce backs. Everything that we were tracking during that time, whether, TSA data from airport activity to
Right.
restaurants, open table data about how many people were going to restaurants, movie theaters, all of
Yeah.
those things, every real time signal we were trying to get at that time. And one of those things that we saw was this massive drop in labor force participation rate, people who are working or looking for work.
Mhm.
And I think what happened during COVID, as you mentioned, was people said, oh, well, maybe I don't need to work, or maybe, I need to take care of someone, or I have health issues that I can't get into the labor force.
Mhm.
And so while other trends started seeing a really quick bounce back, what we haven't seen is that there was a recovery in the labor force participation rate, but just overnight, the US lost about 5 million workers.
Mhm.
And we have not recovered since then. So
Mhm.
labor force participation rate has been sitting, in the 61 to 63% range across the nation. Some states are much lower, some states are doing better.
Yeah.
We've lost, again, that's not going to come back with the looking at the demographic trends. There's going to be more retirement and fewer young people coming in. Beyond the baby boomer acceleration of retirements, the second big trend that we've been tracking for quite a while is the declining birth rate
Mhm.
in the US. And this is not just a US issue. There are countries like Japan, Germany, most developed countries where the birth rate is lower than what we need to replace
Mhm.
people who are dying. So
China too, right?
yeah, absolutely. China, it's a simple math problem that we have from a number of births to number of deaths and
Right.
tracking those things. So a replacement rate for births is 2.1. The US has been well below that for a long time.
Right.
There's only certain states like Utah and a couple others where that is actually above or in that range where it's needed to be. So
Mhm.
we have fewer and fewer young people coming or being born, fewer and fewer people, I think there's a lot of concern, whether it's two income families where people say, I can't have a baby, not sure about childcare, a lot of different things around that, right?
Yeah.
So that is another thing that we've been tracking is, so not only do we have a lot of older people who have either decided to retire early or aren't working as long as we expected to, we're having fewer young people coming in, not just to the workforce, obviously, but also even to the educational system.
Yep.
So we're seeing, declining enrollments both at colleges, but also, school districts are starting to see those declines. We're seeing more colleges close. We're starting to see some of the implications of this storm that we talk about. What we talk about in the report is we're on the outer bands. If you
Yeah.
think of a metaphor of a hurricane, which obviously is not amazing timing given that we're in hurricane season and just had some really obviously seeing the devastation of the hurricane in the southeast, but we are seeing some of those outer bands of what this is, and we're going to see more and more of this coming in the next 5 to 10 years.
And then that extends into an interesting window when you start thinking about other disruptive forces like artificial intelligence and automation. Lightcast is really interesting in that you aren't necessarily gravitating to the prevailing narrative, I guess, which is more about knowledge workers being disrupted by generative AI. And instead, you're looking a little more broadly at the entire workforce and how automation is factoring in, how that might have regional implications and how it might affect certain industries. Can you shape up a little bit of what you've learned, what you're seeing? Is automation just going to solve this? I guess might be one way to look at this. I know you outlined a few ways in which, some of the drought might be addressed, but, even that analysis was a little bit sobering.
Yeah, absolutely. So another key point we make in the report here is that the industries that are struggling right now and will struggle even more to fill jobs are ones that where automation, it can be helpful, but it's definitely not a cure all. And in
Hmm.
fact, a lot of these are jobs that are core to keeping our communities going. Think of protective services, police,
Hmm.
firefighters,
Hmm.
those types of jobs, hospital jobs,
Yeah.
nurses, and all the different care economy jobs.
Right.
Lots of these other types, and then skilled trades, construction,
Hmm.
infrastructure type jobs. These are jobs that are not easily replaceable because, very little need for the technology in a lot of those fields already. That isn't to say obviously technology in healthcare is booming. Absolutely. But if you think of blue collar jobs, you think of protective services, we need people, you know, I was just driving into work today and seeing our local city here in Idaho. There were a couple people working early on in a sewer system. We all take that for granted as we drive to work or drive to the grocery store, right?
Right.
Those are the types of jobs that aren't glamorous. In
Hmm.
fact, they're hard to fill already because the pay isn't amazing or people don't think about those types of jobs. They're going to be harder and harder to fill
Hmm.
because of the makeup of those jobs. And we can get into the demographics of just, how many men make up a lot of those jobs and how the decline of the prime age labor force participation rate has really been acute with men by itself. So
Hmm.
they're male dominated fields where there's fewer men to work, and while there's been some really noble efforts to get more women in certain of those occupations, it's become just, again, from the mechanics of it, it's going to be harder and harder to fill those jobs.
Yeah. And that's where the impact of the drought is going to be a little more pocketed, both regionally and by industries. Like it's not like a tsunami, even though I liked the metaphor, the
Mm.
silver tsunami, but it's not like the wave will hit everyone all at once. It's more that certain industries and certain regions will face shortages. And maybe just one more beat on that. How might that play forward? And then maybe we can start getting into the solution side of the things. But if you're envisioning, this drought getting worse in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, what are some of the potential implications of that?
Yeah. So I think what this will be pervasive across every local economy because, again, every economy requires, hospital
Yeah.
systems,
Kind of like
uh,
frontline workers from,
frontline, exactly. Frontline workers, all those jobs that were so important through COVID.
mhm,
Obviously, they're vital to keeping our communities going. So
mhm,
every community is going to be impacted. At the same time, I think what we're seeing, and there's been a lot of research around the geographic impacts of AI, whether you're
yep,
looking at the use of Gen AI or the actual types of skills and companies and laborers or workers inside of AI. If you think about that, obviously big impacts or a lot of growth. And what we're seeing is in Silicon Valley, where there are already pockets of tech workers, right?
mhm,
At the same time, the impacts of AI might impact the white collar workers more. I mean, I think they very much will. What we're seeing though with this report is really focused on, again, a lot of non-bachelor degree jobs that drive the economy, whether you're looking at truck drivers to nurses to secretaries and admin workers, people who work in buildings, people who do bookkeeping,
mhm,
all of these things. Now, again, some technology is going to disrupt some of those occupations more than others. But
sure.
what we're seeing is those economies that have over reliance on, whether it's manufacturing, especially durable manufacturing, where it's going to be harder and harder to fill those jobs.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of investment coming into different regions for those. We're starting to see that already,
Mm.
whether it's the CHIPS Act, other things where these really impressive plants are being built and workers can't be found and need to be imported in.
Yeah.
So I think what we're seeing here is the implications are going to be widespread, but based off of the type of industries that drive your economy, the type of occupations, if you have a higher concentration of some of these community oriented jobs, you will see maybe a earlier impact in your local economy or to the economies that you serve, whether you're an educational institution or not.
Hmm. And then, the potential ways that we could stave this off. We talked a little bit about automation, immigration is another one that's discussed. Also, perhaps shifts in workforce participation in a positive direction, that 61 to 63%, if that could tick up a few points, perhaps that's another place where we could see more favorable outcomes. How might we address this? And I know there are challenges with pretty much each of these, but what are some ways in which we might start to see the drought staved off?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a number of solutions that we offer really focused around thinking locally, local workforce development, making sure that your labor market system, educational system, and workforce system align, that you're training for the needs of the local economy and
Mhm.
being really hyper proactive in that realm. I think that's one of the things we talk about quite a bit in the report. Immigration is another big hot button topic, especially as we get
Yeah.
for the election. But what we see, if you see, look at the data, any growth of the labor force recently has been fueled by immigration. And it's not a cure all either because other countries have fewer and fewer people and there will be fewer people to come in. But the data is pretty clear that we need to be more open minded on immigration policy than we are. So that's a controversial state right there by itself. But just from a pragmatic perspective, there are core industries, especially if you think about food systems, agriculture, a lot of these jobs that many Americans don't want to do. And that, if you go to whether it's a farm or the supporting supply chain around agriculture, that's really needed. So
Mhm.
we go in depth around immigration, around automation and where it can be helpful. And we see that as a job enhancer more than a job replacer.
Mhm.
There's, we talk a lot about globalization in the report as well. I think the other thing I'll mention is as a really potential solution here when we think locally, I think there needs to be a much more hyper focusing on the type of data that's needed. And I say that speaking as a data company, but specifically around career navigation. There's a lot of confusion and misperception about the types of careers that are available, how much you can make in a job, what are the skills that are needed, how do you really open up even the opportunities of knowing what kind of degree or training should I get? Because what is the ROI of that?
Right.
That's a lot of what we do at Lightcast and enabling organizations to look at that, to have that very local outcomes focused data, because otherwise we're all walking in the dark. And especially this really topsy turvy economy, what's going to happen with AI, what's happening with all of these macro factors, the importance of data becomes that much more relevant over time. And the
Mhm.
right data, the right outcomes focused data, the right skills based data is super important.
Yeah, and then some of the folks who use Lightcast are really trying to get out ahead of some of this stuff, particularly when it comes to training and workforce development and education, where at the same time there's this questioning of higher ed, the return on investment, the trust of that institution is really in jeopardy. But then when you look more at a local level, frequently, I mentioned community colleges earlier, frequently there are boots on the ground who are able to provide more targeted micro credentials, micro
Yeah.
learning that, we're going to really need to beef up that side of the equation to be able to address a lot of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. More short-term focused, stackable, a lot of talk about stackable credentials, micro credentials,
Mm.
but also just, very adaptable, agile programs.
Mhm.
And I think community colleges are at the nexus point, or kind of the focal point for us here, because they have been, if you look at local workforce investment and development boards, the workforce development system, and the broader workforce ecosystem, there's a realization that the systems we have aren't keeping up with the changing nature of work,
Right.
the need for workers and individuals to be lifelong learners.
Mhm.
Maria Flynn from Jobs for the Future was just talking about this on a policy webinar the other day about the need to think bigger and differently, not just dab on the edges here, on
Mhm.
the fringes of what's happening. And I think one of those things that we have seen for over 20 years in serving community colleges is that they've been doing this type of work, a lot of just unsung behind the scenes work for a long time.
Yeah.
And this type of being agile, for instance, Northern Virginia Community College, President Ann Kress does an amazing job there. They have a data center program that is focused on specific skills and occupations to fuel the
Mhm.
huge boom in data centers.
Mhm.
This is very, quick programs, quick training that was adapting to what they saw as a huge need for their region. And it's a
Right.
huge need nationally. That's just one of many, many examples
Mhm.
that is data focused, providing the right kind of career data insight to those individuals to then say, here's what's available to you if you take these kind of training and programs. That's happening whether it's, in Indiana with mechatronics or, in California with non 4-year degree IT programs to meet the needs of the tech sector. It's
Mhm.
happening all over the country.
Yeah.
And we take it for granted, even at Lightcast, because we work with some of these institutions and they're using our data to help with these things. But I think when we talk about these bigger macro issues at the national level, I think telling the story of those pragmatic, practical solutions are happening
Yeah.
are really great best practices that then share and help scale across the country.
Yeah, and this is sort of embracing that post-boomer mindset. No shade on the boomer generation. They provided a lot over the years, but there was that sense of scarcity, higher ed as the primary path to the top echelons in the meritocracy. And that got that generation where they needed to go or not. But
Mhm,
then
mhm.
it left the rest of us with some residual mindsets that really aren't particularly helpful, like the focus on the elite 4-year graduate program, R1
Right,
universities.
right.
When if you look at this at a local level, which is what Lightcast does, it's really helpful reframing. And if you think across every community in the US, there is a community college, there is some sort of local option for folks who are thinking about really tight time cycles. Give me just what I need to equip me with what I need to get to the next thing in my path. And I think the problem, you were touching on this earlier, is just the lack of visibility around what skills do I have? What skills do I need? And if I get these skills, will it turn into a job? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, as I mentioned, this is the things that, we live and breathe this every day at Lightcast and our clients, helping our clients think about this, local community colleges, the great unsung heroes there, but more and more universities are thinking about this, whether it's specifically in serving, the adult population, the non-traditional student that's becoming more and more of the common,
Yeah.
more traditional route. There are lots of universities thinking about this. There's a lot of non-traditional education providers that are popping up. We living in a proliferation of opportunity to go learn, whether you go to YouTube,
Hmm.
Coursera, edX, Udemy,
Hmm.
there's so many options online as well. I will say what I'm particularly passionate about, what we're passionate about at Lightcast is shining a light on where those connections and adjacencies are, where one person says, I have this skill. How does that connect to an opportunity? Just speaking personally, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show,
Yeah.
I had no idea. I was, working hard, heads down at a newspaper in a newsroom. No idea the connection of those communication, writing, critical thinking skills,
Hmm.
working on a deadline, all of those things, and how that could connect
Hmm.
into working for a tech or data company like I did
Yeah.
and have for the last 16 years. And you could say the same for so many different people
Hmm.
and saying, I feel like I'm stuck. I don't know. I've had a dead end over here in a job that I have no idea. Like I'm in a cul-de-sac. I can't figure out where to go.
Yeah.
And so that's where the importance of that, of having a data focused and I think a skills focused approach as well. We're hearing more and more and seeing more and more adoption of removing degree requirements. Just this morning, we're speaking on Jobs Friday here. The new report for September jobs report came out
Yeah.
and the unemployment rate for tech workers is the lowest in 4 years, two
Mm.
and a half percent.
Mm.
And we're seeing for the fifth straight month, our friends at CompTIA just were sharing this that for the fifth straight month, we've seen an increase in job postings that don't require a 4-year degree
Right.
inside the tech world. And that
Hmm.
is just one example of there's more and more movement to saying, let's strip out the degree requirements and more and more movement. Let's articulate the type of skills we need for these jobs
Yes.
versus thinking that we have to just go down those traditional routes that you talked about.
Yeah, and you mentioned articulation. That's the other one. Problem formulation and skills articulation are two of the buzzwords that have really been popping in my mind lately. Where your example is a great one, where frequently you can't even articulate implicit skills that you have. And then also the blending of your durable skills with more short half life, hard skills, technical skills, and just shifting your mindset to realize I'm going to need to continue to update my harder skills, technical skills. Anyone who's played with any of the LLMs knows what we knew a year ago is no longer as relevant as what you need to learn today. That's not going to go away. That the nature of work and the mindsets necessary to be successful in work really are shifting. And that's a lot of what I got out of this report. The name of the report is The Rising Storm. It's from Lightcast. I've been talking with Josh Wright, who's the EVP of Growth in Education and Government at Lightcast. It's been a wonderful conversation. Josh, anything we haven't hit on thus far that you wanted to make sure we spend a little bit of time on, and then maybe we can get to closing remarks?
The thing that we haven't hit on as much, this is a problem that isn't just where, individual workers who are need to articulate their skills or communities who need to be thinking about this is every part of the ecosystem, including employers.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll say there is we're helping employers more and more realize that they need to be optimizing their job postings, their job recs to say, we have outdated skills. It's not just the degree requirement. It's saying we're asking for too many skills where
Yep.
some of these skills are outdated,
Right.
those types of things. Being employer led is super important as you build
Hmm.
out training programs. I think every community college, every workforce development professional will know if we don't have the engagement from employers, then we're
Right.
not doing anything worthwhile.
Yeah. No
And
more
employ
unicorn job descriptions, please. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Overspec unicorn job descriptions. And that has been something we're seeing a real increase in awareness of. And that's again where this kind of understanding local labor market demand, connecting, optimizing, optimizing job postings, optimizing programs on the education side, and helping individuals optimize their resumes or digital walls or whatever that's going to be to help that system be more aligned.
Hmm.
Again, it's there's no perfect solution here, but that local workforce development focus, I think, is the biggest thing that I would communicate to the audience here. That is, these are again thinking globally, acting locally, like you said earlier, Mike, is a great way to put it. These are big macro global issues
Hmm.
that require local solutions. And I think when we say, there's all of these great skills first movements and understanding like I think there's a lot of momentum around it. I would say start local, think about local pilots around those to help say, what, even if it's just one sector of our economy, can we help open up talent pools that we didn't even realize because we're thinking differently? And that local workforce development lens is super critical here.
Yeah. And there's a lot of activity also around, new ventures in this space. I had Ryan Craig on talking about apprenticeship models. Matt Wilkinson was talking about externships, different ways to kind of really bolster individuals' career trajectories, but then also from the employer side, to your point, being a little more flexible, adaptable, responsive to these needs, and perhaps, breaking out of some of these stereotypes around which types of the workforce we're seeking, looking to new ways to kind of embrace talent and develop talent really across the spectrum, across our lives. It's been a wonderful conversation here, Josh. As we're concluding here, folks are heading back to the rest of their lives. Do you have some closing remarks, final takeaways as we wrap up?
Yeah, I would just say, first of all, thank you for helping us shine a light on this report. Just raising awareness of these issues is first and foremost. And we're here not just to raise these issues, but to help individuals and organizations adapt to this environment, become more agile. How do you blend human skills with these technical skills, as you mentioned? I think this world, it's going to take constant adaptation because things are changing so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission, our purpose is to help our clients build a future ready workforce. And so whether that's an educational organization, whether that's a community organization, whether that's an employer, being agile and adapting to this and thinking totally differently, it's going to require different thinking and a really data driven, skills driven approach to this. That's the thing that drives us and that we're super passionate about. Again, not just presenting the challenge, but here are some of the particular solutions and what's working at a local level and how those things can be scaled.
Yeah, it's a real resource. Lightcast.io is the website. If you weren't aware of Lightcast, now you are. Check them out. We'll include a link to the report in the show notes for the episode. It's really a first step, I think, is just elevating the awareness, shining a light on it, as you were saying. Wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining me today, Josh.
Thanks, Mike.
And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. If you did, please subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.